The sound of rapid footsteps echoed down the quiet street as a girl, her face streaked with tears, ran desperately toward an unexpected figure, a trash collector, oblivious to the frantic scene unfolding around him. It seemed like a moment of pure confusion, but little did he know, his life, and the lives of everyone nearby, were about to be turned upside down. What was this girl running from? And why was she heading straight toward him in such a panic? In the blink of an eye, chaos erupted. Moments after she reached the collector, the sirens screamed to life, and police cars appeared, blocking the street in every direction. Was she being chased? Or was something else at play, something bigger, more dangerous? As the girl's sobs grew louder, the mystery only deepened. Why were the police here, and what did this random encounter with the trash collector mean for everyone involved? The tension thickened as the officers began to close in. Was this just a misunderstanding, or was it the beginning of something far darker? Stay tuned as we unravel what happened next. You won't believe the shocking turn of events. The scene remained frozen for a brief moment, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The girl, trembling with fear, clung to the trash collector's arm. Her frantic eyes darted between him and the growing cluster of police vehicles that had now blocked every exit from the street. The sirens screamed louder, echoing off the surrounding buildings, sending an unsettling chill through the air. As the officers stepped out of their cars, the weight of the situation became undeniable. Something was very wrong, and no one knew exactly what was about to unfold. The trash collector stood still, his hands frozen on the handles of the cart. He was a quiet man, used to the monotony of his daily routine, but today was different. The girl's frantic behavior pulled him from his comfort zone, and instinctively, he tried to offer her some form of reassurance. "It's okay, you're safe here," he murmured, though his voice barely masked the confusion in his eyes. But the girl didn't respond. She just continued to sob, her hands gripping him with a mixture of desperation and fear. He noticed her clothes were torn, as if she'd been running for miles, and there were faint bruises on her arms. Something had happened, something serious. As more police officers emerged from the vehicles, one of them, a senior officer, barked orders at the others. "Secure the area. I want a full sweep of the street. Nobody leaves until we figure out what's going on." His voice was sharp and commanding, cutting through the chaos. The trash collector's heart pounded. He couldn't shake the sense that he had been swept into something much larger than he could comprehend. But why him? What had he done to deserve being caught in the middle of this mess? Meanwhile, the girl, barely able to speak through her sobs, began to whisper something. Her words were so quiet that only the trash collector could hear them, and he had to strain to catch them. "They're after me," she choked out, her voice full of panic. "They're coming for me. I don't know what to do." The words hit him like a punch in the stomach. Who was after her? Why? And why was she turning to him, of all people, for help? As if on cue, an officer approached, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the scene. "Is she with you?" he asked the trash collector, his tone cold and professional. The trash collector hesitated for a second, unsure of what to say. I don't know," he replied, his voice shaky. "She just ran up to me. She looked scared." The officer didn't seem to believe him. His gaze lingered on the girl, then shifted to the trash collector with suspicion. "Stay here," the officer ordered, before turning his attention to the girl. As the officer approached her, the girl visibly flinched. Her body tensed as if she were preparing to bolt again, but the trash collector stepped in. "Please, just let her talk," he said, his voice soft but firm. "She's been through something. She needs help, not more fear." The officer glared at him but reluctantly nodded. He gave the girl some space, though his hand rested on the gun at his hip, his posture ready for any sudden move. The girl's breathing was heavy now, ragged, but she slowly began to speak again, her voice breaking with each word. "They came to my house," she whispered. "They said they were looking for something. But I didn't know what. They hurt my mom. And my brother. I had to run. I had to get away before they found me too." The trash collector felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He wasn't prepared for this, not by any stretch of the imagination. Who would hurt a girl like her? And what was so important that they'd tear apart a family just to find it? The questions swirled in his mind, but none of them had answers. The officer, still watching with cold eyes, was clearly on edge. "Who did this to you?" he asked sharply. The girl's eyes filled with fresh tears, her hands trembling as she shook her head. "I don't know. I didn't see their faces. They wore masks, gloves. They were too fast. I couldn't keep up." She paused, her voice shaking with the weight of the memory. "But they said they were coming for me next. And I thought I could hide. But they're coming, I know they are. I can't go back there." The tension in the air was thickening by the second, and the officers were starting to look more concerned. They exchanged glances, murmurs of uncertainty floating through the group. What had they just stumbled into? The trash collector's mind raced. He couldn't ignore the girl's desperation, nor could he ignore the cold, calculating fear in her eyes. He wasn't trained for this. He was just a man doing his job, pushing a cart along the streets. But now, his actions could mean the difference between life and death for this girl. As the officers moved closer, their radios crackled to life, the sound sharp and urgent. "We've found something. The alley at 5th and Oak. It looks like they've been here." The senior officer's face tightened as he barked out orders. "Get over there, now. Do not engage unless necessary." He turned back to the trash collector and the girl. "Stay put," he ordered them both. "We're going to take it from here." But the trash collector knew the truth. The situation was spiraling out of control. It wasn't just the girl they were after, there was something more to this. Something bigger than any of them realized. The streets were starting to feel smaller, as if the walls were closing in. The girl's breathing quickened again as she looked at the officer with a mix of fear and defiance. "Please," she begged. "You don't understand. If they're here, they'll find me. They always find me. You need to help me." For a moment, the officer hesitated. His eyes flicked between the girl and the trash collector. He was torn, unsure of how to proceed. The girl was clearly scared, but there was something about her story that didn't add up. Why would anyone want her so badly? The trash collector felt a stirring within him. Something deep, primal, told him that he couldn't walk away from this. He couldn't just let this girl slip through his fingers, no matter how confused or out of his depth he felt. Before he could say anything, the sound of tires screeching against the asphalt echoed from down the street. A dark van had pulled up, its engine cutting off with a sharp roar. The doors swung open, and figures in dark clothing quickly emerged, their movements precise and calculated. The girl's eyes went wide with terror. "No!" she screamed, her voice raw with fear. "They're here! They're here!" The trash collector instinctively stepped in front of her, trying to shield her, though he knew he couldn't protect her from whatever was coming next. The police officers immediately tensed, hands on their weapons, preparing for the worst. The senior officer raised his radio to his mouth, his voice low and urgent. "We need backup, now. They're here. All units lock this down." The van's occupants didn't seem fazed by the police presence. One of them, tall and imposing, looked around with a cold, calculating stare. His eyes landed on the girl, and a smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "Found you," he said, his voice calm and ominous. The trash collector's heart raced. He realized then that this wasn't a random incident. This wasn't some simple misunderstanding. This was something far darker, and the girl was at the center of it all. As the figures began to advance, the police officers quickly positioned themselves, forming a protective perimeter around the girl and the trash collector. But everyone could feel it, the overwhelming sense that this was just the beginning. The tension was unbearable. Would they make it out of this alive? What would happen when the dust finally settled? The streets were silent again, but only for a moment. The figures in dark clothing took slow, deliberate steps, their eyes focused solely on the girl. The trash collector felt an icy shiver crawl down his spine as he noticed the distinct, military-grade gear they wore. It wasn't just about chasing someone down anymore. These people were professionals trained, well-equipped, and most certainly dangerous. The police officers positioned themselves quickly, weapons drawn, their faces set with grim determination. The senior officer, who had been trying to keep a calm presence, finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Stay where you are. This is a police matter now. Step away." But the man leading the group in dark clothing didn't flinch. His cold eyes never left the girl. He was undeterred by the officers or their weapons. "This doesn't concern you," he said calmly. "We're here for her, and she's coming with us." The girl, trembling and with tears still streaking her cheeks, flinched at the man's words. "No," she whispered, almost to herself. "Not again. Please. No more." The trash collector, caught between fear and a rising sense of responsibility, stood firmly in front of her, his hands outstretched in a protective stance. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't some trained fighter. He was just a man trying to make a living. But something in his gut told him that he couldn't walk away now. Not when this girl's life was at risk. He turned to the officer beside him. "You've got to stop them. They can't take her. She's just a kid. She's..." The senior officer, still cautious but now visibly frustrated, cut him off. "I understand. But they're too well prepared. This is not a simple case. Whatever she's involved in, it's bigger than we thought. We need to play this carefully." The trash collector's heart raced, but the girl's grip tightened on his sleeve, her fingers cold and shaking. I don't know how much longer I can keep running," she whispered. "Please help me. I need to survive." The officers were waiting for orders, their eyes darting between the two opposing groups. The tension in the air was palpable, and it seemed like everything was on the verge of breaking. But the trash collector's instincts told him that waiting wouldn't help. Not now. Without thinking, he turned to face the approaching group, his voice trembling with urgency but carrying an air of resolve. "You want her?" he called out, meeting the dark-clad man's gaze. "You'll have to go through me first." The leader of the group didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled, as if amused by the gesture. "You really think you can stop us?" he asked, his voice low and mocking. The trash collector didn't respond. He wasn't trying to be a hero, he was simply trying to buy the girl enough time to escape, time for the police to get a handle on the situation. The senior officer finally stepped forward, his voice booming. "Enough!" he shouted. "Get back! All of you, back off. Now!" The situation was spiraling out of control, but the officer's commanding tone made the dark-clad figures hesitate. For a moment, no one moved. The police were trying to figure out whether a confrontation was inevitable, and the group was assessing their next move. Then, as if a silent signal had been given, the dark-clad leader nodded sharply. "You won't get in our way," the man said, almost dismissively. Then, with a signal to his group, they started moving in sync, flanking the girl from all sides. The trash collector's heart raced faster. They weren't going to stop, not without a fight. And this wasn't a fight he could win. But still, he couldn't just stand there. He glanced around, looking for anything that might give him an advantage, a distraction, anything to make the attackers pause. Before he could act, the girl, now frantic and desperate, broke free from the trash collector's grip. She darted toward the alley behind them, her legs unsteady but determined. The officers shouted, but she was already halfway down the alley before anyone could react. "Get her!" one officer yelled, his voice sharp with urgency. The trash collector didn't think. He ran after her. The alley was narrow and winding, littered with dumpsters and debris. He could barely keep up, but he had to. She was the only one who truly understood what was happening, what they were both running from. As he turned a corner, he saw her up ahead, looking over her shoulder with wild eyes. "You have to stop," she cried out. "You can't." The words were cut off by a loud crash. The trash collector spun around just in time to see one of the dark-clad figures lunging toward him, knocking him to the ground. Pain shot through his body as he hit the concrete, but he didn't have time to focus on it. With a surge of adrenaline, he scrambled to his feet and shoved the man off, managing to push him back just long enough to buy himself a few seconds. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep this up. The man was bigger, stronger, and the trash collector was out of his element. He glanced back toward the girl, but she was gone. Panic surged through him. The officers arrived at the mouth of the alley just as the dark-clad figures reached the trash collector. The senior officer barked orders, but the figures didn't flinch. Instead, they moved faster, more aggressive. The trash collector's eyes went wide as he saw the girl again. She was running toward a door on the far side of the alley. She didn't look back, didn't stop. She had found an escape. "Go!" the trash collector shouted, trying to warn her. "Get out of here!" But the words were lost as the group closed in, and he knew there was no way he'd make it to her in time. A loud crash echoed as one of the figures took a swing at him, knocking him back into the wall. Dazed, he struggled to stay conscious. But then, through the ringing in his ears, he heard something that made him freeze. The girl had reached the door. But it wasn't an ordinary door. It had something written on it, something that made his heart stop. Containment. A realization hit him. The girl wasn't just running from random people. She wasn't just some kid caught in a bad situation. She was running from something far more sinister, something that could ruin them all if it wasn't stopped. The door creaked open, and she stepped inside. It was too late for him to help her now. The door slammed shut behind her, cutting off any hope of reaching her in time. The figures in black stood in front of him now, their leader glaring at him. But he wasn't done yet. With all the strength he could muster, the trash collector pushed himself to his feet and faced them. He wasn't sure how he could stop this, how he could get the girl back, or even if he could survive this encounter. But one thing was certain, this wasn't the end. It couldn't be. As the figures in black closed in, the trash collector found himself caught between a choice: fight to the bitter end, or run and try to find another way to save her. But what could he do? What could anyone do when the world itself was against them? The final moments of the scene were as if time had frozen. The police officers were closing in, and yet the figures were too prepared, too relentless. The trash collector's heart pounded, but he wouldn't give up. Not now. It was only then that he heard the sirens again, but these weren't the usual police sirens. They were different. Far more intense, more urgent. And then, as if the world had suddenly shifted, something changed. The figures in black stiffened. One of the officers shouted, "Hold your fire. Stand down." But it was too late. The trash collector wasn't sure what was happening, but he could feel that something had shifted. He wasn't sure how, he wasn't sure why, but he knew that there was still hope.